I, 27F, have been with my fiancé 30M for 4 years. We got engaged 6 months ago after 2 years of living together, and I really thought we were on the same page about everything. We recently bought our first house together, which felt like a huge step, a new chapter in our lives. It's our first jointly owned place, and we've been busy packing, organizing, and planning how to make it feel like our own little sanctuary. Moving in was chaotic, as expected. We had boxes everywhere, kitchen stuff mixed with books, my clothes in random bags, and his gaming setup taking priority over anything else, of course. We were both exhausted but excited. It felt like we were finally building something permanent together. I was unpacking some random boxes in the living room, sorting through old papers and junk mail, when I came across a crumpled piece of paper shoved between some receipts. It caught my eye because it looked out of place. It wasn't just another old bill or grocery list, it was folded up tightly, like it had been hidden on purpose. I almost tossed it aside, but then I saw the handwriting, which I recognized immediately as his. He has this unique way of writing, with letters leaning slightly to the left. I unfolded it, not thinking much of it, just curious to see what random note he'd scribbled down. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My first instinct was to put it down and pretend I hadn't seen it. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe he wrote it ages ago and it was some stupid vent he never meant for anyone to see. But I couldn't just ignore it. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it completely. I decided to read it, hoping it was something lighthearted or silly, but a part of me knew this wasn't a joke. The first few points on the list were almost laughable, like she insists on watching reality TV every night and she hogs all the blankets. It was a relief at first because those sounded like typical couple complaints. But then, as I kept reading, the tone shifted. There were points like she's too independent, it scares me and I don't think I can handle her family. Each line felt like a punch in the gut. There were maybe a dozen points in total, some more serious than others. A few made me laugh in disbelief, like she always puts hot sauce on everything and ruins the taste. But then there were ones that stung deeply, like she doesn't need me the way I need her, and I'm not sure I'll ever live up to her expectations. It wasn't just a list of annoyances, it was a list of annoyances, it was a list of doubts, insecurities, and things he'd never told me about before. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, confusion, betrayal. I didn't know what to do. My immediate reaction was to storm into the room where he was setting up his computer and demand an explanation. But I stopped myself. We still had boxes everywhere, and the house was a mess. I knew if I confronted him now, it would turn into a huge fight, and I didn't want that on our first day in the new house. I tried to keep busy, but my mind was racing. Why did he write this list? Was it during a fight? Did he mean any of it, or was it just a moment of frustration? I couldn't stop thinking about it. I ended up sitting on the floor in the middle of a pile of half-unpacked boxes, just staring at the list. I felt like I was seeing our relationship through his eyes for the first time, and it wasn't a pretty picture. Eventually, I texted my best friend, who's known both of us for years. I sent her a picture of the list, and within seconds, my phone was ringing. She was outraged on my behalf, already planning a whole speech for me to confront him with. But the more she talked, the more uncertain I felt. What if he didn't mean it? What if it was just a way for him to vent, and I'm making a big deal out of nothing? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a list. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, going through the motions of unpacking but barely registering what I was doing. Every time I looked at him, all I could see was the list. I kept replaying our past conversations, trying to find any hints of these thoughts he'd kept hidden. Had I missed red flags? Had he been trying to tell me something, and I just didn't notice? By the time we finished unpacking, it was late, and I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront him right away, not while everything was still so chaotic. Instead, I took a picture of the list with my phone, just in case. I didn't know why, but a part of me was scared he might deny writing it or try to laugh it off as a joke. I needed proof, something to hold on to while I figured out what to do next. After that, I shoved the paper back into the box where I found it, acting like nothing had happened. I could feel the tension building inside me, but I forced myself to smile and joke with him as we set up the living room. It felt fake, but I needed time to process this before I brought it up. I kept thinking about the list, trying to prepare myself for the conversation that was coming. In my head, I went through every possible scenario, from him being genuinely sorry to him, saying we should call off the engagement. Once the last box was emptied, and we were finally sitting on the couch together, I took a deep breath. I looked over at him, still debating whether I should wait or just rip the band-aid off now. He caught my eye and smiled, completely oblivious. That's when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I took one last deep breath, turned to face him, and said, "We need to talk." Update 1. Tay. When I told him we needed to talk, his expression changed instantly. He turned to face me, suddenly serious. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo of the list, and handed it over. He took one look at the screen, and I could see the color drain from his face. He just stared at it, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I didn't wait for him to speak. I asked him why he had written it and what it was supposed to mean. He looked up, his eyes wide, and started stammering. He was trying to say something, but the words weren't coming out. It was like he was caught off guard, scrambling to find the right explanation. But I was done waiting. I told him I wanted a straight answer, no excuses, no dodging. He finally admitted it. He said he had written the list a few months ago, during a rough time in our relationship. He was quick to say that it wasn't meant to be serious, that it was just a way for him to vent when he was feeling overwhelmed. I could tell he was panicking, trying to downplay it like it was just a stupid mistake. I didn't let him off the hook that easily. I pointed out that if it wasn't serious, he could have just thrown it away. Why keep a list like that hidden in a box with our old things? He got defensive, saying it was private, something he never intended for anyone to see, especially not me. He kept repeating that it was just a way to get his frustrations out, but I wasn't buying it. I took the list back and said we needed to go through it, point by point. I wanted to know what he really meant by each item. He looked uncomfortable, shifting on the couch and avoiding eye contact, but he nodded. He knew he didn't have a choice now. The first item was one of the trivial ones. She insists on watching reality TV every night. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. He explained it was just something that annoyed him sometimes, that he didn't mean it as a serious complaint. We both knew it wasn't a big deal, and I could almost laugh about it if the situation weren't so tense. But then we got to the more serious points, like she's too independent. It scares me. I asked him what that was supposed to mean. He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck, and said he felt like I didn't need him. He said he felt small in comparison, like he wasn't contributing enough. It wasn't something he'd ever told me before. I was stunned. I had no idea he felt that way. Next was I don't think I can handle her family. I asked if he meant that my family was overbearing. He said no, it wasn't that. They were nice, but he felt like he didn't fit in. He thought my parents judged him, especially after we moved in together. He said he always felt like he was walking on eggshells around them, trying to prove himself. Again, this was news to me. He'd never mentioned feeling uncomfortable around my family. As we kept going through the list, it became clear that so many of these points were rooted in misunderstandings. He thought I disliked his friends because I rarely joined their hangouts, but I told him I just felt overwhelmed in large groups, especially when I didn't know everyone well. He assumed I wasn't interested, but the truth was, I just needed more time to get comfortable. Then we got to the one that hit me the hardest. I'm not sure I'll ever live up to her expectations. I asked him what he meant by that. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, fear. He said he felt like I was out of his league, that I was smarter, more successful, and more put together. He said he was constantly worried he was going to disappoint me. I didn't know what to say. It hurt, not just because of the words, but because he had never talked to me about any of this. He apologized then, saying the list was a mistake, something he deeply regretted. He said he loved me and wanted to marry me more than anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he had kept all of these thoughts hidden for so long. If he really loved me, why hadn't he just talked to me instead of writing it all down like this? I told him we needed to take a step back, that maybe we should pause the wedding plans. He looked like I had slapped him. He started crying, something I'd only seen him do a few times before. He said he had been feeling insecure and overwhelmed by everything. The engagement, the house, the pressure to be the perfect partner. He admitted he'd written the list because he was scared. Scared of not being good enough. Scared of failing me. Scared of marriage itself. For the first time, I saw him vulnerable in a way I hadn't before. He was always the confident one, the one who had it all together. Seeing him break down like that, it was hard not to feel something for him. But I was still hurt, still trying to wrap my head around everything he'd kept from me. In the end, I told him I needed time to think. I decided to stay with my parents for a few days. He didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, tears still in his eyes, and said he understood. He helped me pack an overnight bag, and we barely spoke as I left. The drive to my parents' house felt like it took forever, and when I finally pulled into the driveway, I just sat there for a moment, staring at the darkened windows. I knew this wasn't over. We had too much left to unpack, and I wasn't sure if we could come back from it. As I walked up to the front door, I realized I had no idea what was going to happen next. But for now, I just needed space to breathe. Update 2. When I got to my parents' house, it was past midnight. I didn't want to wake them, so I slipped inside quietly. But of course, my mom was already up, waiting. She's one of those moms who just knows when something's wrong. She took one look at me, still holding my overnight bag, and led me straight to the kitchen without a word. I sat at the table while she put the kettle on, the silence heavy between us. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told her everything. The move, finding the list, confronting him. I even showed her the photo on my phone. She looked stunned, like she couldn't believe he had written all of that. She kept glancing back at the list, rereading the points, shaking her head. My mom has always liked him, so I think this hit her almost as hard as it did me. My sister showed up the next morning. She's 2 years older than me and never misses an opportunity to share her opinion. She read the list and immediately said it was a sign that we needed better communication. She wasn't shocked like Mom was. Instead, she said it made sense if he'd been bottling up all these feelings. She asked if we had ever really talked about marriage expectations or if we'd just assumed we were on the same page because we'd been together so long. Later, my dad pulled me aside. He's usually pretty reserved, so I wasn't expecting much, but he gave me one of those serious looks and told me he'd support whatever decision I made. He added, though, that maybe my fiancé wasn't ready for marriage if he felt the need to write a list like that instead of talking to me directly. It was subtle, but I knew what he was hinting at, that maybe this relationship had deeper cracks than I realized. Over the next few days, my phone kept buzzing with texts from him. He was apologizing over and over, saying he missed me, begging me to come back home so we could work things out. I read every message, but I didn't reply. I needed space to think, to figure out what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I could just go back and pretend like everything was okay after finding that list. Then, out of nowhere, he suggested we try couples therapy. This shocked me because he's never been the type to open up to strangers, let alone a therapist. He's always been the, we can handle it ourselves kind of guy. It took me a day or two to decide, but eventually I agreed. We set up an appointment with a therapist who specializes in premarital counseling. I figured if there was any chance of saving this relationship, we needed to get everything out in the open. The first therapy session was tense. We sat across from each other, and the therapist asked us to share why we were there. He went first, admitting that the list was his way of processing his doubts. He said he'd been feeling overwhelmed by the pressure of getting married, especially with everyone around us talking about it nonstop. He explained that he'd started writing the list during a moment of panic, and it just spiraled from there. The therapist turned to me next, and before I could even start, I broke down. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding back until that moment. I told him how hurt I was, how betrayed I felt reading those words. He looked stunned, like he'd never expected me to react this way. He's seen me upset before, but never like this. I think it was the first time he realized the depth of the damage the list had caused. The therapist listened carefully and then pointed out something neither of us had considered. The list wasn't just a random vent, it was a symptom of deeper issues we hadn't addressed. She asked if there was any outside pressure that might have influenced his doubts. That's when he admitted it. He said his mother had been pushing him to settle down for years. Every time we visited her, she'd make comments about how he needed to lock it down and stop dragging his feet. It was like a light bulb went off for me. All those times his mom had made snide remarks about us not being married yet, I brushed them off as harmless. But now I realized how much they'd affected him. He'd been carrying the weight of her expectations this whole time, and I hadn't even noticed. I couldn't hold back anymore. I confronted him about why he never stood up to his family. I asked why he'd let his mom's pressure affect our relationship instead of just talking to me about it. He looked guilty, admitting he was scared of upsetting her. He'd been trying to keep the peace with his family, even if it meant hurting me in the process. He promised to set boundaries with his mom from now on, saying he wanted to be more open with me about his feelings. The therapist suggested we continue therapy to help us rebuild trust. It felt like a small step forward, but I wasn't ready to forgive him yet. I told him I'd move back in, but I was still unsure about the wedding. I needed time to see if things would really change. When we got home, the first thing he did was find the physical list. He pulled it out of the box where I'd left it and brought it to me. Without a word, he took a lighter from the kitchen drawer and set the corner of the paper on fire. We watched it burn together, the flames curling up the page until it was nothing but ashes in the sink. It was supposed to be a gesture of moving forward, but as I watched the ashes swirl down the drain, I couldn't help but wonder if the damage could ever truly be undone. Update 3. We kept going to therapy. After the first session, it was clear we were just scratching the surface. The second session felt heavier. The therapist didn't waste any time, diving straight into the core issues. She asked us to talk about moments in our relationship where we felt unsupported. I thought we'd talk about recent stuff, the engagement stress, the house, but then he brought up something from 2 years ago, when he lost his job. I remember that time well. He'd been laid off suddenly, and I tried to help however I could. I took on more expenses, covered the rent, and cooked his favorite meals to cheer him up. But sitting there in the therapy room, he said it was one of the worst periods of his life. He didn't feel comforted, he felt judged. He said he'd look at me working late, handling everything, and he felt useless. He admitted that it was then he first started questioning if he was the right person for me, if he could ever live up to my expectations. I was shocked. I thought I'd been supportive, doing everything I could to make it easier for him. But he said he felt like I was silently disappointed in him. It was hard to hear, and it made me wonder if maybe I had been unknowingly judgmental. I couldn't remember ever saying anything to make him feel that way, but I realized it might not have been my words. It was the look on my face, the extra hours I put in at work, the way I handled everything without asking for his help. I started doubting the foundation of our relationship, wondering how many other moments like this we had misinterpreted. In the third session, things got even more intense. He opened up about how he's always felt like the weaker one in our relationship. He said he's never felt like he was on equal footing with me because I'm more successful, more driven. The list wasn't just a random vent, it was his way of justifying why I might leave him someday. He said he was trying to convince himself that it would be okay if things ended, that maybe it would be for the best. Hearing that was like a punch to the gut. I'd never thought of our relationship as unbalanced. I always saw us as a team, but he'd been seeing me as a source of pressure, not a partner. I realized then that it wasn't about money or career success, it was the dynamic we'd fallen into. He felt like he was always in my shadow, and he never told me. Then he dropped another bomb. He admitted that his mother had once suggested he find someone less independent. My jaw nearly hit the floor. I thought about all the times she'd made little comments about my job, my lifestyle choices, even my cooking. I'd always brushed it off as her being old-fashioned, but now I could see the pattern. She had been undermining our relationship from the start, and he'd been absorbing it all without telling me. It all started clicking together. I thought back to family dinners where his mom would ask when I was planning to cut back on work or make snide remarks about me not being domestic enough. He never stepped in, never defended me. He just laughed it off, and I did too, not realizing how deeply it was affecting him. Now I understood why he'd been carrying all this doubt. He was trying to live up to his mom's expectations and mine, and in his mind, they didn't align. We left the session, but the tension followed us home. I couldn't stop thinking about how his mom had influenced his doubts about me. When we got back to the house, I confronted him. I asked why he never stood up for me, why he let his family's opinions seep into our relationship without saying a word. He admitted he was scared. He was afraid of losing their approval, afraid of rocking the boat. He said he didn't realize how much it was affecting him until now. I was fed up. I gave him an ultimatum, either set boundaries with his family or reconsider the engagement. I told him I wasn't willing to be disrespected anymore, especially not by the people who were supposed to become my in-laws. He pushed back, saying I was being unreasonable. He accused me of trying to control the narrative, of making him feel like less of a man. It turned into a heated argument, voices raised, and for the first time, I said out loud what had been simmering in the back of my mind. Maybe we shouldn't get married at all. We both went silent. The words just hung in the air, like a final blow neither of us had seen coming. We stood there, staring at each other, and it was like the floor had fallen out from under us. We agreed to take a 2-week break from each other, no contact. He stayed at the house, and I went back to my parents. My sister was the first one to give me advice. She's been married for 5 years, and I've always seen her relationship as perfect. When I told her everything, she didn't look surprised. She said maybe our relationship isn't as strong as we thought, and that hit me hard. It was the last thing I wanted to hear, but deep down, I knew she was right. Halfway through the break, I got an email from his mother. It was a long message, full of her concerns about our relationship. She said she was just trying to look out for her son, but the whole thing was dripping with passive-aggressive remarks. She hinted that I was too demanding, that I wasn't a good fit for their family. It was infuriating. I could feel the anger building up, a new wave of it washing over me. Reading that email, I realized his family never truly accepted me. They had been undermining us from the start, and he'd let it happen. I'm left sitting here, wondering if this relationship is even worth fighting for anymore. Update 4. After reading his mother's email, I felt a wave of anger that I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just the passive-aggressive remarks, it was the realization that this wasn't new. This was the same judgment and undermining I'd dealt with for years, and it had seeped into our relationship because he never set any boundaries. I forwarded the email to him with a short message, "This is exactly what I'm talking about." He responded almost immediately with a single line, "I'll handle it." But at this point, I wasn't convinced. I'd heard these promises before, and they always fell flat. He'd say he'd handle his family, but nothing ever changed. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became I needed to confront his mother myself. I'd never done it before, always relying on him to manage his family's expectations. But clearly, that wasn't working. I dialed her number before I could second-guess myself. When she picked up, I stayed calm. I told her I'd seen the email, and I was setting boundaries going forward. I explained that while I respected her as his mother, her comments about our relationship were inappropriate and needed to stop. Her tone shifted instantly. She went from surprised to defensive, insisting she was just looking out for her son, implying once again that I wasn't good enough for him. I ended the call quickly, feeling a mix of triumph and fury. That night, he showed up at my parents' house. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. He apologized right away, saying he'd finally set clear boundaries with his mom. He admitted he'd let this go on for far too long because he was scared. He was scared of standing up to his family, scared of losing their approval. He confessed that he'd been hiding behind their expectations because it was easier than facing the reality of our issues. It was a moment of honesty I hadn't seen from him before. He asked if I'd still be willing to work on things, saying he was ready to make real changes if I'd give him another chance. I told him it wasn't enough to just promise change. He needed to show it. I suggested something drastic, eloping, just the two of us, to prove that it was really about us now, not his family or their opinions. He hesitated. I saw it in his eyes. It was just a split second, but it was enough. I realized then that he still wasn't ready to break away from his family's influence. That hesitation was another gut punch, another sign that we might not be on the same page. I took off my engagement ring and handed it back to him. I told him we needed to call off the wedding, at least for now. He didn't try to argue. He just took the ring, his hands shaking. I could see how devastated he was, but I was beyond exhausted. I packed my things and moved back to my parents' house. It felt like my entire world was crumbling, but there was also a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control. In a moment of frustration a few days later, I posted a vent on a private forum about everything. The list, his mother's involvement, the constant pressure. The response was overwhelming. People told me I dodged a bullet, that I deserved better, that I was right to demand boundaries and respect. It was comforting to see so many strangers support me, but it also made everything feel more real, like I was truly moving on from this relationship. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from his best friend. He said he had no idea things were this bad. He'd noticed changes in my fiancé's behavior over the past year, but didn't realize the extent of it. He apologized, saying he wished he'd stepped in sooner. It was surprising to hear from him, but it also validated that I wasn't overreacting. Other people had seen the cracks forming too. About a week later, a package arrived at my parents' house. It was from him. I opened it carefully, expecting some sort of apology gift, but inside was a handwritten list. The title read, "Reasons I Want to Marry Her." My hands shook as I unfolded it. This list was different. There were no complaints, no doubts. It was filled with genuine, heartfelt points like, "She makes me want to be better, and I can't imagine life without her." It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. I started crying before I even made it halfway through the list. It was everything I'd wanted to hear, everything he'd never managed to say before. But I couldn't shake the fear that it was just words, that things wouldn't actually change. I was torn between love and the reality of all the issues we still hadn't resolved. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the list, thinking about everything that had happened. Eventually, I picked up my phone and sent him a message, "We need to talk." He replied almost immediately, "Whenever you're ready." And just like that, the ball was back in my court. I knew this was it, the final decision. If I gave him one last chance, it had to be all or nothing. No more lists, no more doubts, no more hiding behind his family's expectations. I still loved him, but I wasn't sure if that would be enough to fix everything that had been broken. Update 5. We agreed to one last therapy session before making any final decisions about our relationship. I arrived first, and it felt like forever before he walked in. He looked nervous but determined. There was a heaviness in the room, like we both knew this was it. Either we'd come out stronger or it would be the end. The therapist asked us to share what we needed from this session. I went first, laying everything out. I told him I'd lost trust in him, not just because of the list, but because he'd repeatedly let his family's opinions dictate our relationship. I wasn't sure I could count on him to put us first. It felt harsh, but I needed to be honest. I didn't want to continue if things were just going to go back to the way they were. He took a deep breath and didn't try to interrupt. When it was his turn, he finally admitted that he'd been spineless, hiding behind his family's expectations because it was easier than standing up for himself, or for me. He said he'd been terrified of disappointing his mom, of losing her approval, and that fear had made him act like a coward. He told us he'd already taken steps to change. He moved his mother's spare key out of the house, and he'd had a tough conversation with her about respecting our boundaries. Then he did something unexpected. He got down on one knee, right there in the therapist's office. He took out a small box, but it wasn't the same engagement ring. He bought a new one, a symbol of starting fresh. He told me he wanted to do this the right way, without any lists, without any doubts. He asked me to marry him again, saying he wanted a life together where we made our own rules. I froze. It was the most raw and vulnerable I'd ever seen him. The therapist watched quietly, giving us space. I took a long pause before saying yes, but it wasn't an enthusiastic yes, it was hesitant. I told him this was his last chance, and there wouldn't be another. If he couldn't show me that he was truly ready to prioritize us, it would be over for good. We decided to go through with the elopement plan we'd joked about before. We didn't tell anyone. We went to the courthouse the following week, just the two of us. It felt like a clean slate, a chance to start again without the weight of everyone else's expectations. It was simple and quick, but in a strange way, it was perfect. There were no big speeches, no pressure, just us making a choice together. Afterward, we broke the news to our families. My parents were cautiously supportive. They were happy for us, but worried after everything we'd been through. His mother, on the other hand, was furious. She called him immediately, demanding to know why we hadn't included the family. For the first time, he stood up to her while I was right there beside him. He told her that his wife came first now, and if she couldn't respect that, then she wouldn't be part of our lives. It was a turning point I never thought I'd see. We took a month-long honeymoon, just the two of us. We needed time away from everyone and everything to reconnect. It wasn't perfect. We still had moments of tension, little arguments about things we hadn't fully resolved, but it felt like we were both putting in the effort. We spent our days exploring new places, trying new foods, and talking about the future without anyone else's voice in our heads. When we got back, we agreed to continue therapy, even after getting married. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was helping us understand each other better. One night, he brought up the original list again. He suggested we read through it together, to face it head-on. I was hesitant but agreed. We sat on the bed, reading through each point. We laughed at some of them, like the one about reality TV. We cried over others, like his fear of never living up to my expectations. It was cathartic, like we were finally letting go of all that weight. After we finished, I handed him an envelope. Inside was a list I'd written titled Reasons I Almost Didn't Marry You. He read it silently, taking in every word. It wasn't meant to hurt him. It was my way of being honest about the moments that almost broke us. He put the list down, pulled me into a hug, and whispered that he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure I never felt that way again. We decided to start a new tradition. Every year on our anniversary, we'll write a list of reasons we love each other. It's our way of checking in, of making sure we're still on the same page. It's small, but it feels like a step in the right direction. We're still a work in progress. There are days when I catch myself doubting if things will really be different, and there are moments when he hesitates, falling back into old patterns, but we're both trying. We've made it through some of the hardest parts, and for the first time in a long while, I feel like we're actually moving forward together. I know this isn't a fairy tale ending. It's not perfect, but it's real. We're committed to making it work, even if that means taking it one day at a time. I might update again in a year, just to let you all know how we're doing. For now, I'm hopeful, and that feels like enough.